use a new computer.
I think I got it.
Good evening. I will call to order the special council committee work session this Monday, September the 16th. We've got one item on our agenda this evening, and that is discussion around the 2014 budget process. After a few introductory comments, I'll turn it over to our city administrator, Bob Harrison. We're joined this evening by Mayor Eva Freisinger and our Director of Finance, Diane Marcotte. In the audience also is the Deputy Finance Director, Beth Ann, and our Issaquah Chief of Police, Paul Ayers. So with that, we began a discussion a number of months ago in a council work session to begin to look at our financial policies. I believe that first topic was titled Financial Review Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. In January, we continued that discussion and continued to hone in on some potential changes and actions. This evening at our regular council meeting, one of those actions will come before the council for during regular business, and that will be an agenda bill that would establish a contingency fund. Our goals were to take a look at how in the past we have done the budgets. Deputy Council President Paul Winterstein, Council Member Tola Martz, and myself met with the City Administrator and Diane to talk about how we might streamline and do a little bit better job. You'll recall that when we approved our potential goals for Tola, was it this year or next year?
It was for this year.
Okay. You had proposed a goal to move the budget deliberation discussions into the council chamber and televise those to make the process a little more transparent and to provide an opportunity to involve our citizens in that process. And indeed, that's what we are doing. And so without any other comments, I'll turn it over to City Administrator Bob Harrison.
Thank you, Council President Butler. As he mentioned, you have a memorandum which we'll be going through quickly this evening just for the benefit of the audience. It's on the board, and it's from Councilmember Butler, Winterstein, and Martz. And it's a suggested budget review process for this upcoming budget season. So the goals that we started with were first and foremost streamline and improve council's review of the city budget and focus on that budget relative to the city's financial policies. We also discussed being efficient with the council and the public's time for our overall review as we are implementing a change this year and actually televising all the budget review meetings. So we want to be cognizant of that. With this new proposed schedule, we had 6 meetings last year that served as review time. This is proposed to have 3 meetings, and there was a change. One of the meetings that occurred last year with the council as a whole was the nonprofits funding, and there's an agenda bill this evening for council consideration, and that would be referred to services and safety, and then would come back to council and kind of come into the budget process a little later. So that would be a total of 4 meetings, so we'd actually be able to enhance our efficiency by 33% by this proposed review process. And so here we are tonight, September 16th. Budget review process begins with this committee work session. As I mentioned earlier, we have the nonprofits agenda bill that will be referred to the Services and Safety Committee, and those groups will be informed to come and do their regular presentations to that committee. And then October 7th at that council meeting, the mayor officially presents her budget to the council and to the community. And so this would be the first of our suggested Committee of the Whole review sessions. October 14th would be the first one. And we would be looking at a comparison of budget to philosophy. So as the council is aware, and Councilmember Butler mentioned earlier, we've begun a whole kind of review of the city's financial policies. And when we developed the budget this year, we kind of used those as a guideline, even though they haven't been finally adopted by the city council. We'll be doing a presentation on the goals that you adopted earlier this year and then how we're going to be able to finance those and try and achieve those in the upcoming budget, whether through budget financial allocations or just into the work program. And then we'll be providing a big picture overview. So instead of having all the department directors come in and do short 10 to 15 minute presentations, what we'll be doing is looking at some of the larger issues that are in the budget. So the police department will come in and talk about overall safety. As you know, this is the second year of a proposed program to increase our staffing in the police department by 2 officers. And so the police department will be talking about the enhancement to the force and how that overall enhancement has enabled their provision of services. Development, and that's really a 2-part process. One would be the Economic Development Department. That was a new program that was added about a year ago. And the second one would be Department of DSD, essentially. EFR, which is going to be a long-term kind of program. It's still somewhat in flux, but we do know there's going to be some changes coming forward. And then Human Services, which is really tied in with a couple of goals that we had this year for neighborhood engagement and building a healthy community. So we'll be spending a little bit more time on that. And we'll be starting what we really should say is part 1 of the general fund, since that's the primary fund in the city. We'll be looking at revenues and expenditures on that first evening. Second budget review session, October 24th. We'll continue the general fund, be looking at the cash balance policy, contingency fund, which council is considering this evening. And then there's a couple of recommendations that come in again in terms of our process from various committees. So there's an actual LTAC committee which looks at applications. And we receive recommendations on those funding for those programs. The Arts Fund and then Human Services is on a 2-year cycle. So their recommendations have really already been provided from the previous year.
So Bob, that LTAC thing that you mentioned, just what is that for those who may not be familiar with the term?
It would be Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. Thank you. Trying to remember what the AC part of that was. Yes. We have the various enterprise funds. So that would be the water, sewer, stormwater, the street fund, the capital funds, debt service funds, and looking at maybe the Office of Sustainability, medical self-insurance, and all other funds. Those are other kind of standalone funds that exist within the city.
So Bob, you've talked about 2 of the meetings that are scheduled and provided an outline. I'd just like to point out that since this is a council work session, audience members will have an opportunity to comment once the council completes their discussion, which is the protocol under which we operate with council work sessions. And then as a part of those first 2 meetings, I suspect that might generate questions from council members. How will those questions be addressed, or are you going to cover that later?
That's a great lead-in, Councilmember Butler, to our next slide, which would be the final budget review session. So as you mentioned, I think the council kind of ad hoc committee, which looked at the process, anticipated we would get those questions as they came up. And so whatever questions that come up during the budget review process, our intent would be to kind of finalize those and have the answers provided to you in time for review at that October 29th final budget review session. An opportunity for the deliberations that evening. And then As we discovered last year, and we talked about in this ad hoc committee, there were a lot of kind of policy issues that came up or questions that wanted further research or study that came out of the budget review session last year. And so we wanted to provide some opportunity for council to kind of capture that policy discussion and see if there's some referrals that the council would like to make to the 2015 goal setting session. And so we're specifically talking about allocating some time in your review process for that. And then just any other miscellaneous items that come up during this process.
Tola?
Yes, Bob. There's been a conversation going on in Land and Shore currently about fees and fee structures, and there was a conversation really on did we want to try to adopt a policy that would help provide guidance on that. Is that something that we expect to do as part of this budget, or is that an example of one of those things that is likely to be pointed towards a 2014 goal-setting session?
So I would anticipate that by the time that review gets finished, I think it's coming back to a council work session later in the year, that it would really impact on the 2015 proposed budget. Now, if council does adopt that and we do a mid-year adjustment in fees, that could take place. But we would probably produce the budget for this upcoming year, not anticipating any changes in the fees unless they've already been authorized by council.
Thank you.
So the council is required to hold a public hearing on revenues and property taxes, and that would take place, as typically does, at the November 4th council meeting, and then there's an adoption of an actual ordinance at that time on property taxes, if I recall. The November 16th council meeting would have the final public hearing on the budget, and then we would anticipate adoption of the final budget at that time. But if council's not quite ready or they want some additional review time, we've left in an additional meeting there on December 2nd that council could take up final adoption of the budget at that time. And then one last issue is, as the finance department is putting the budget together, we obviously don't know what the outcome of the park bond would be. That's coming up for vote in this upcoming November. And so we're essentially not incorporating any changes affiliated with the park bond, so that you would see probably an amendment based in the beginning of next year's budget based on whatever the results of that bond would be. So Diane, do you have any other comments or thoughts, or pretty much cover it? All right, thanks.
So additional questions or comments of Bob? We moved through that pretty smartly. And so is everyone comfortable with the process that has been outlined and how we're going to proceed this fall? Eileen?
Thank you, Fred. Actually, it looks very wonderful. Thank you for the team working this out. It seems... We're not on? Thank you. It just seems as though we are being more efficient with our time and reducing our meeting time almost in half. So although we can still get through all of the necessary business for the budget, hopefully it appears to be a much more efficient and streamlined process. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. It is, a lot of this really started with Tola's goal about being more transparent, moving it to council chambers and televising those. And we had some interesting and spirited discussion around that. But we have gotten into these work sessions, which are televised also, I think provide a little more transparency, and we are able to go about the work of the council, on TV in a more relaxed, and have the kind of discussions that I think lead to good decision making and involving everyone. So Tola, thank you for that initiative here a number of months ago that brought us to this point.
Well, thank you, Council President Butler, and I want to thank you and Councilmember Winterstein. This year, I think we're going into the budget process just with a lot earlier, a number of process things covered a lot earlier that'll help minimize surprises as we get to the budget, and minimizing surprises makes for a better budget process for all the hard work the city staff puts in and then all the time that we put in on it as well. Thanks.
Well, while we're passing out praise, I'd like to acknowledge Diane, who really kicked this whole process off back in June with the yesterday, today, tomorrow financial review of our policies and the discussions that followed from that. Any other comments or observations around the direction that we're moving in? Paul?
Thank you, Fred. So one of the things I like about this is combined with our current focus on the policies. Last year when I went through the budget deliberations, it was really left up to each of us individually to have read and reviewed and to go into the deliberations familiar with the policies and anything that we wanted to discuss how they may pertain to those policies. So actually we're overhauling them. I think we're expanding them, we're simplifying, we're going to be looking at I think an overall better set, an easier to work with set of policies here shortly. And I think I expect this to feel different, that to be with everybody with a common and current understanding of the policies as we look at the proposed budget. We'll be able, that will be the horizon upon which we can evaluate the budget. And I think that in itself is going to help us quite a bit. And less wondering about, what kind of philosophy or budget guidance each of us individually may be following. We'll all be working off the same platform. So I think that in and of itself is, I'm expecting that to have a significant difference and contribute to the more efficient process. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Ava, Madam Mayor, any comments that you'd like to make at this time? You have the awesome responsibility of presenting the proposed 2014 budget shortly, and
Yes, I do. It's, I think, very rewarding and good to see that there is a process. It has been an evolutionary process, and I can go way back in the history of mayor's presentations of budgets and council's responses and how much time it took to work through the budget process. Long ago, when the city was considerably smaller, it took a relatively short period of time, and then as the city grew and as things became more complex, and as the city council instituted a policy of having a capital improvement fund and other things, it became a much more time-consuming process. It is well that the council is able to go through a very deliberative and thoughtful process and use that time to the greatest advantage, with an emphasis on the public being able to understand exactly what it is that's being done and what's being recommended or decided by the council. It's a great step forward. I commend you for it.
thank you. Any other comments? Bob, do you have any summary comments, or Diane, any summary comments before I call to see if there's anyone that would like to speak to this who's in the audience?
So even though we are doing some program highlights, if there are any specific department directors you would like to invite during the review process, we can arrange for them to be there as part of this evaluation. So we're not limited to these four. These were what we thought were pretty significant adjustments or highlights, but just want to let you know they'd be available.
Thank you. Diane?
One thing I was just in The spirit of providing advance notice, we've been making we've been making some significant changes into the organization of the overall budget, where certain things are costed out. And we're also working on a major project with a consultant and what we call a cost allocation plan. Several years ago, the state auditor's office undertook a performance audit of selected jurisdiction, and we're currently under review by the state auditor, and they are looking for us to implement what we call a cost allocation plan. We're in the final stages of working with a consultant, and that also, in addition to the park bond, that might have some ramification or implications on the budget, but until we see what those numbers look like. And then a lot of it will be some conversations with the council. An example would be is there might be something related to utilities whereby historically in the past, the council has chosen to subsidize it by having it funded by the general fund. What we want to do is bring those to your attention and to be more transparent, and then the council can make the ultimate decision on, is this something you want to continue, or would you like to make some changes? So we do have a number of things coming down the road where it won't be business as usual. We're just sort of moving ourselves forward in recommendation from the state auditor, as well as some best budget practices.
Great. So, not seeing any other comments, is there anyone in the audience desiring to comment on the 2014 budget process that we've been discussing? Anyone in the audience desiring? Seeing no one then, is there any other business to come before this special council work session on the 2014 budget process? Seeing none then, we are adjourned until our regular council meeting, which will start at 7 o'clock.